our speakers to come up. Once we see them, I shall call up on stage a representative from Tata Steel. Till that point, just a minute or two, and we shall start with Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee in conversation with Udayan Mukherjee. Quick introductions before our delegates come up here. Abhijit Banerjee, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics 2019, is the Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Banerjee shared the 2019 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences with Esther Duflo and Michael Kremer. Banerjee is a co-founder of Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, along with economists Esther Duflo and Sendhil Mullainathan. He is the co-author of Poor Economics. He also serves on the Academic Advisory Board of Plaksha University. His new book, co-authored with Esther Duflo, Good Economics for Hard Times, was released in October 2019 in India by Juggernaut. He will be in conversation with Udayan Mukherjee, who is an economist and television journalist. Udayan was formerly the managing editor with CNBC India. He obtained his BSc in economics from Presidency College, Kolkata, and an MA in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University. He began his career with UTV. At CNBC India, he was the managing editor and anchored live market shows until he stepped down in 2013. In 2018, he wrote a fiction novel titled Dark Circles, and his latest book is also out. In 2012, he won the Ramnath Goenka Awards Journalist of the Year in the broadcasting category. It gives us great pleasure to call up on stage or down on the grand steps. I shall also call on stage now, just to address our delegates and the audience, Piyush Gupta, Vice President, Steel Marketing and Sales, Tata Steel. Piyush ji.
To have you with us as part of Epilogue.
Thank you.
Udayan, thank you very much for doing this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm fully aware of that I'm standing in between you and Professor Banerjee. I'll take a minute to only thank all of you because we have just put an end. We're going to put an end to a lovely, lovely week which we have put together as part of LitFest. We know culture and literature lives in our heart when we live in Bengal and we live in Kolkata. What we are delighted for is that it has found a place, especially LitFest has found a place in your busy heart. And you came in large numbers this year because this LitFest has been bigger than ever before. We've had 175 speakers spread over 5 days in various sessions attended by 600 to 700 people in every session. Today's group also is pretty exclusive because it's invitation only through cards, and we are deeply delighted to see all of you to listen to Professor Banerjee. LitFest has grown over the years, and as the team planning for it, Malvika and Jeet, along with Tata Steel and our various other sponsors, we can only get better and better with each passing year. But all that will only be possible if you all promise to come in similar energy and excitement all through the coming years. Thank you very much for being part of LitFest for this year. Wish you the very best for the coming year, and wish you the very best for the evening, which you're all anxiously and excitingly waiting for with Professor Banerjee.
And this is
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
eagerly anticipated epilogue of the Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet 2020. Now, it's an honor to have Professor Abhijit Banerjee here, but he's not new to the Victoria Memorial Hall. He has been to the literary meet before, but it's an honor to have him back as a Nobel laureate. So I'll be brief. Thank you very much, Abhijit, for making time to be here. And thank you very much for coming here. He's going to speak on good economics for hard times, which is as appropriate a topic as could ever be. Thank you very much. Enjoy the talk.
Special evening to have Abhijit here with us today. It would have been special anyway, but it's made more so by this spectacular setting that we sit in. I mean, Abhijit has done several conversations over the last many weeks and months, but I think I would not be stretching it if I said that rarely has it been in such magnificent surroundings. Abhijit, would you agree with that?
This is way and away the most stunning setting I have done this. You're right, I've done this many times, but this is by far the most spectacular setting. Thank you very much to the Tata Fest for inviting me. This is and to the city of Kolkata for hosting me all these years. I look forward to this evening, and thank you for being here.
What is, since you mentioned about the city, and I think all of them have a great sense of almost ownership of you, since you are a homeboy in a sense. What is your relationship with the city like? I mean, you spent the better part of 2 decades out here growing up. How do you think of Kolkata?
It's the one place where I instinctively feel at home. I know, partly because I actually spent lots of years wandering around, so I know the streets relatively well.
Only the south or even North Calcutta?
Even the north. I would say not the very north, but up to, I don't know, to Shobha Bajar or something, I know the city reasonably well.
But your backyard is Mahanirban Road.
Backyard is Mahanirban Road. But I sort of, but also just the vibe of the city is very, very much something I pick up instantly. It's somehow the way people look at you, sort of the kind of frankness of the view, the tone of the voices in the street. It's programmed inside me.
Has it changed over the years? I mean, or do you come back often or not very often?
I come every 5 weeks, I would say, so, or something. Maybe too often. You don't get perspective. In a sense, I don't see change as much as, like everybody is here all the time. I don't really see change. It sort of all looks kind of continuous. The city is cleaner. The traffic is a little bit less mad. I mean, in many ways, the city is in better shape than it was 20 years ago, I would say. And I mean, then there obviously there are, structural issues with the location, with global warming. There's all kinds of things one should worry about. But the city feels good in a sense.
Is the food as good?
Good question. I think so. I'll tell you something that I think is rarely commented on, which is that my growing up years, which is let's say from 1970 to 1980, I mean, these are really bad years for the whole country.
Yeah.
And I'll give you the metric of that, which is that people don't like changing the price of goods. So what they do instead is change the quality and the size. So the Sandesh wood that was about 25 paisa would get thinner and less tasty and more, the chana will be replaced by some flour, and it would and the quality was actually, food was really getting worse and worse through that period, something like the late 60s to the late 70s. And now, in a sense, it has, in many ways, is recovered, and suddenly the restaurant culture didn't exist then and has become extraordinarily vibrant. So there's lots of things that have, I think, food-wise, I think it's you could sentimentalize some past where, whatever, there was some, everything was pure and fresh, but I wasn't alive then. In my memory, food has only got better.
So you can construct a Sandesh index for the Kolkata economy?
Yes, and I think the Sandesh index, we should start now so that we can put it on a scientific basis. I'll provide consulting for free Sandeshes.
Your mother lives in the city, but I want to ask you this question because I think so many people in the audience would know your father and remember him so fondly. He was such an iconic teacher. He taught me as well. Do you feel bad about the fact that he isn't around when you've got this extraordinary honor?
Obviously, I mean, there's not. I mean, I think in particular, since I think he would have been. I mean, I think he sort of had a sense of what is achievement in economics, and he would have been very. I think it would have been made him very happy. So of course.
That is obvious. But how would it have reacted? What would his reaction have been?
That's a hard one to guess. I'm sure he'll find some way of finding a way to turn it into half praise.
That's exactly what I'm asking you, because you had a very sharp tongue.
But I'm not sure I would. But it's not me, so I wouldn't know how to get there. I think he would have his own ways of getting there. I don't think I tend to be effusive with my praise.
Okay. Now the other thing is, we had hoped earlier that you would come along with Esther, but she couldn't make the trip. And tell us a little bit about her and your professional association with her, because you were not always colleagues, and at some point you started collaborating on your work. Would you say that she's had a great influence in how you're thinking? I mean, she's a Nobel laureate in her own right, but has she shaped the course of your work over the last couple of years, or influenced it significantly, you would say?
Absolutely. I mean, how could you work with someone for so long and not be influenced? And especially Esther's very special. She's incredibly kind of all absorbing. She gets signals from everywhere, and she keeps all of them in her head. So I tend to be relatively kind of linear in my way of being, in thinking about things. I need to work everything out step by step. That has some value, but it's having someone who's very different from me, someone who sort of will react to things that I say and say, well, but how does that fit this or that, and then force me to think harder. It's a discipline and a challenge that is really wonderful.
You are effusive in your praise. It's very nice to hear you speak about Esther. I'll just take 20 seconds and tell you an Esther story, because not to demonstrate that I know her well, but because...
But you do know her well.
I do, but it is because all of you in the audience will like this very much. You see, there was a time, many years back, when Esther would come to India very often, and a couple of times, because she and my brother are very close friends, she stayed over at our place in Bombay. Now, the first time this happened, I was traveling somewhere, and she was at home with my wife, and I come back home from, say, Delhi, and I turned the keys and entered the house, and I see this French girl sitting by the window reading a newspaper, and she turns coolly towards me, and says, in this tone, "Kire, kemon achish?" So I am like, hello? And it's not like, "Kire, kemon achish?" It's, "Kire, kemon achish?" Like almost a parar dada asking you that question. I'm flabbergasted. Then I walk up to shake her hand, and I see, what is the newspaper she's reading? It's Anandobajar Potrika. So I said, "You're bluffing, you can't read that." And she proceeds to read it absolutely perfectly in Bengali. So I said, "What's going on, Esther?" She said, "I have such a lot of work in West Bengal, and this whole translator business was not working out. So I thought, to be effective, I need to pick that language up." So, I mean, this is just completely incredible. I mean, is she a polyglot or what? I mean, does she pick up languages like that easily?
She speaks Russian, German, French, English, a little bit of Bangla, but at least those 4 languages she speaks, or at some point in her life spoke fluently.
Wow. Okay. Now, a lot of our session will be about this book. Abhijit expresses great surprise because this is the first time he's seeing the paperback version of this book. Apparently, he's only seen the hardback. Of course, the bookstore has lots of copies, and all of you, most of you, should pick up a copy of this book. And we'll talk a lot about why you should do that. But in the very first page of this book, there is a small joke. And I want to tell you this joke because it sort of tells you a little bit about this whole thing about economists. The joke goes like this. for those of you who haven't read it yet, the book. There's a woman who gets diagnosed with a terminal illness. She goes to the doctor and says, "Doctor, what can I do?" Doctor says, "You should immediately marry an economist and move to South Dakota." So the lady asked the doctor, "Doctor, will that cure my illness?" He said, "No, but the 6 months which you have to live will seem very long if you do this." Now, this is in the first page of the book. Abhijit, you're an economist. You're married to one. Your parents are economists. Why this self-deprecating thing about economists? I mean, is it your experience with them? Are they
No,
really?
I mean, if you read the chapter, it's about, in a sense, that the chapter is called, and
Economics Great Again.
if you make economics great again,
That's
there's a reference to, if you following the U.S.
Yes.
And it is very much about that, which is that I think economists, as I think we quote in the book, or if we don't, we did it, we took it out, have a bad rep. And I think it's about, and they have a bad rep for a good reason, I think, and that's sort of where we start from. So the joke is exactly to set up that chapter, which is in some sense, it's not exactly the coolest time in history to be an economist.
But part of that chapter is about why they get a bad rep from an academic perspective. But are they really dry and boring people? I mean, is that your experience personally?
No, many of my best friends are economists. They are very serious people. I think they're very serious, and they often very proper. I think economists, in my experience, relative to other people I know, are both well-behaved, proper, and serious. Not boring, but there are very few really wild economists. At least the ones.
Wild economists. No, that's an interesting one. Well, yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, because people who know you, and I hear from reliable sources, is that you're anything but what you just described. Apparently, you're the most amazing cook. Is that right? That you cook up a storm and you have incredible range in the kitchen.
Well, I think in particular, I think cook up a storm is a good description, because I think after I cooked, the kitchen looks like there's been a storm there. But yes, I love cooking. I do it every day. Essentially, every single day I cook. I mean, there are maybe 20 days a year I don't cook.
Wow.
So it's what I do when I come home from work to kind of download my the previous part of the day.
Okay. Now, we'll move on from this economist thing, but I want to ask you, since we are in Kolkata, why are there so many Bengali economists in the world? I mean, a lot of people ask this question. It's almost becoming like Oriya plumbers. I mean, why? I mean, why?
Not to be too insensitive about such issues. To be honest, I think it's a lot to do with, you mentioned my father, but I think Presidency College in my days was an extraordinarily good place to be an economic student. If you looked at who were the people who kind of dominated the master's programs, often at Delhi School and at JNU, they were also from Presidency. It was just an extraordinarily good place to study. And I think having inspiring teachers makes you sort of, exactly as going back to the conversation we're having, economists are not per se cool, but I think if you have cool teachers, you might think they're cool.
Your father was a very cool teacher. I mean, the coolest economics teacher one can get. But is it only that? Is it a presidency phenomenon, you think?
I think it's a cool, I think it's a sort of lots of, I think, impressive public figures, Amartya Sen, of course. I think a lot of those things matter. It looks, it takes it from being kind of you know, the usual joke about an economist is that an economist is like an accountant but more boring, and I think that particular image is you know, it gets resolved if you have role models who are actually exciting. I think it makes a big difference, and it's not. And I think that was true also in the previous generation. I think people like Bhabatosh Dotto were another also very inspiring figures. There's a bunch of inspiring figures in economics for a long time, and that drew in generations of economists into that. I think that's certainly part of it. I don't know whether what the entire story is, but I think that it is certainly the case that role models matter a lot.
Well, you've done your bit to perpetuate that, and because I see lots of students who have come today, and you must be inspiring them too, like you were inspired in turn.
I hope so. I certainly think it's a very useful thing to be. That's sort of why we wrote the book, to kind of defend the profession in a way, in a maybe not a way that the profession wants to be defended, but defend the profession against the particular charges of being both boring and wrong.
Both boring and wrong. Okay. Now, coming back to the book, you wrote your first book, which was a very good book, Poor Economics, and then you took a 10-year gap. This book came 10 years or 8?
Yeah.
8 or 10 years?
8 years.
8 years. Why did you pick up the pen again? Because you write at the start of the book that you thought you would not write a book again, but you did. What was the trigger?
Oh, it was just the fact that there was just like if you haven't noticed, the world seems to be going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, like, you know, this. And you felt like, okay, fine, we could wait for somebody else to write a book of kind of I think the common sense of economics actually says about what we should do, or we could write it, and if nobody else was writing it, at some point we felt that, okay, fine. Even though I don't think we are the best people to write it, I think we're not exactly, a lot of things we wrote in our previous book were things we actually knew very well. We did the work. In this book, we were writing a lot of stuff that came out of other people's work. We had to go and actually read up some stuff and learn it. But at some point it felt like, okay, fine, it would be a fun thing to do. We enjoy writing, and nobody was writing the book we thought needed to be written.
Now, since this is coming after a Lit Fest, I want to ask you a little bit about your writing style as well, because you know what came out after reading the book was that it was almost like storytelling. It was not an academic kind of book. I mean, you spoke about and dwelt on very serious issues, but it was done in almost a different kind of a narrative style where almost anybody could read it as a storybook. It reminded one of Siddhartha Mukherjee's book, for example, the style of writing. Did it come easily to you, or did you have to develop that kind of tone of writing or style of writing?
It's very similar in a sense to our previous book. We had already kind of figured out how to write it. I don't think it was a big stretch. I mean, this one, maybe we have more. This is a slightly more ambitious book, so we're taking on slightly more complicated arguments, and so and it helped to have done it before. But I don't think we invented a style for this book. I think we had already kind of decided how we would write it with our previous book. So it wasn't that, and you know, it's a way of trying to be colloquial while not kind of losing the thread. I don't think it's. I think it's a kind of an obvious thing to try. I appreciate you saying that maybe we are successful, but I don't think that it's. It seems like, you know, if we wrote it all in jargon, it would entirely defeat the purpose.
That's true. Now, it's maybe in your world, in the academic world, it's common to collaborate with someone on writing a paper or a piece of research. But in the world of writing, it's not that common for a book. Yeah. So how did you and Esther divide it up? I mean, how did you collaborate on the book? Did you break it up between you write a chapter, she writes a chapter, or somebody writes, somebody edits?
So we did that. But most of the chapters the way we do it is we first spend quite a long time discussing what would be in the chapter.
Okay.
It's not necessarily what remains in the chapter eventually, but you have some aspiration and you sort of decide. And you decide an arc, basically. We're going to start here, and this is the there's going to be this twist and that twist, and then we'll land here. So that we kind of lay out a plan before we start writing. And then mostly Esther writes the first draft. She writes very, very fast, and she doesn't worry about... I'm very anal about writing. I like every sentence to land already in the right place. That's a very inefficient way to write. So she writes very fast. Now, in this book, actually, I wrote a few chapters, but and we could see exactly how fast she does it versus how slowly I do it. So, you know, because I tend to try to write almost a finished product first time. I don't like letting go at all. So, but then what she gives me is often more and less than we need. And then I spend a long time moving pieces and really then sort of creating a structure, and then she would read it again. And finally I have the last, the sentence by sentence edit I do. Extremely, you know, I'm very picky about that. So I do every sentence and every paragraph, and I read it to myself, and it's a very slow and inefficient process, but it's something that I very much feel that needs to be done.
The way you describe it, does it infuriate Esther?
No. Esther's very forgiving, and she understands that there is some, maybe it slows things down, but there's some value. I think she believes some value is being added in that process of kind of nitpicking about every word.
Even while describing the process of writing the book, you take a dig at economists. You say, economists don't write books for human beings. There's a phrase in the book, you said, don't you say that?
Yep.
What do you mean by that?
You know, I mean exactly what you meant, which is that it's written in like normal language. There's no, you don't have to master a whole other set of jargon to read it. You can read it sort of off the bat.
Okay. Your book is called Good Economics for Hard Times. Hard is a hard word. How hard are the times now when you look at it? I mean, do you have a sense that things are spinning out of control?
No, I don't know that. I think it's hard times in the sense that I think there is a lot of anger in the world. There are lots of people who seem to be very upset. Is it really that we are in a completely disastrous state? No. The world economy has basically done very well for the last 30 years. If you take the number of poor people, not the fraction, the number of poor people have been halved. That's a massive change, more than halved actually. So that's a massive improvement. There's lots of massive improvements. The number of kids dying from malaria has been halved in the last 10 years. It's just, there's lots of good news. So it's not that the world is in a terrible place, but it's perceived as being in a terrible place by too many people who seem to be then flailing.
Where do you see more anger? Where you work in America or when you come to India?
In America, surely. America is really, at this point, extraordinarily polarized on economic lines. I think they're just people who have sort of, at some level, have given up on everything, on the market, on governments, on everything, and they don't know which way to turn.
You know, you said that economists get a bad rep. I mean, from reading everything that we see about the United States now, it seems like even capitalism is getting a terrible rep.
And in many ways, deservedly, I would say. It's not that I think if you look at the US, it has somehow managed to have 40 years of uninterrupted growth with no wage growth. That's a stunning kind of condemnation of an economic system. If none of the growth is shared with the average person, the median family is basically getting very little of that growth. And that's a stunning fact. And most of it has gone to the top 1%, the 0.1%. It is a condemnation, and it should be a condemnation of capitalism. It wasn't, I mean, the narrative of capitalism has always been that, it's going to be, good for everyone. And if it's only good for the very, very rich, then it is and should be a condemnation of capitalism.
You spend a lot of time in your book on inequality and the things that you're talking about. And there is one very interesting statistic you mentioned, which is that if you had a sample of the poorest people, chances are 1 in 3 in the United States that they will never come out of that poorest bracket. But I couldn't see that number for India. I mean, if you started that thing in India, what would the number be?
There is some attempt to do it. It's very low. India is among the lowest education mobility countries in the world. I think Pranab Bardhan computed something like that. And even for income mobility, India has very low mobility.
How low? You think if you had to take a guess, what would it be?
I don't remember.
I mean, if you
think
start with 100 people, how many people would finally get out of that trap?
I don't remember the number. I'm not going to. I won't. Very few, but I don't remember the exact number.
One of the lowest in the world?
Yeah, there is. I don't know lowest in the world, but I think I just saw the numbers for some. I think that there was only 80 countries in that, and we are in the bottom 10 or something.
What
so
is
not not all the world, but maybe among the more countries with better developed statistical systems, but the top 80 countries were in the bottom 10.
At the same time, I mean, if you look at even the Indian economic context, the successful people or the stronger lot seem to be getting stronger. What you call winner takes all syndrome in your book. And even if you look at the Indian markets, a handful of 15 or 20 companies are getting better and better to the exclusion of everyone else. And the poor who are in that trap, they are unable to get out. So is that gap only getting wider, or do you see a way out of it?
So, I mean, just to be precise, if you look at poverty in India has fallen quite dramatically in the last.
But hasn't it slowed down in the last 5-6 years?
Last 5-6 years, it's slowed down, and right now I suspect it's slowing down even more. I mean, if you look at the first time in the last I don't know, since the 60s, that the average consumption per capita as measured by the NSS has dropped.
I know.
This is the first time the data was in the public domain for a while, and then the government said the data is bad, but I don't think it's any worse than the previous rounds of data, which showed that the poverty was going down. So I think it slowed down dramatically. But still, I mean, in the big picture, it's not the case that, some of the growth has been shared. Poverty has fallen. What hasn't happened is a lot of mobility. So the rich have stayed and become richer, and inequality has grown dramatically.
And you don't have a recipe or prescription out of it, or to narrow it?
Well, I think the recipe for narrowing it is the one that, I mean, we do say something about it, which is that I think the two pieces are one. I think the fact that we are, our first reaction to an economic problem that looked very much like a Keynesian demand slowdown was to cut corporate taxes is a kind of to me, we are in a time warp. We're really not, we don't see where we are, which is that, this is the corporate sector is actually sitting on cash and not doing much with it. And that's because there's not demand. And somehow we have a mindset of making policies which are based on some model of economics where somehow all the dynamism is provided by the rich, but it just doesn't seem to be true. So I think there are obvious things we could do differently.
Now, You spoke about this sluggishness in consumption. I heard you say a while back that India could be on the verge of a recession. Do you believe the current GDP numbers, or do you think if you tie in the consumption numbers with the kind of slowdown we have seen in the investment side as well, that it's conceivable that we are actually over the last few years have at best a flat economy, not the 5, 6, whatever percentage point which is being shown?
Yeah, I mean, it's conceivable, certainly. I mean, the problem with not having any real new, reliable data on the informal sector, which is where the anecdote suggests the big slowdown is, and that's what's driving. If you look at why it's two-wheelers that are slowing down the most, it's the people who are in the informal sector who buy the two-wheelers. And so it seems like that's where you might be seeing big slowdowns. Our statistical apparatus is essentially incapable of capturing short-term changes in short-term, meaning 1, 2, 3 year changes in the informal sector. So God knows.
You use the word recession. I mean, if somebody else had used the word recession, we could have said that they actually mean a slowdown, but they use the word recession. You wouldn't do that casually.
No.
You really do mean that we could be staring at a recession, like negative GDP growth?
I mean, look at what Arvind Subramaniam is saying. He's saying that our statistics look like worse than 1991. That's the claim he makes, right? 1991 is the 1 year when we had a recession.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not saying, I keep being careful to not say I know, because given the state of the data, and nobody knows. But could we be in a recession?
Already?
I mean, Arvind's claim is that all our macro statistics, the investment, the exports, the imports look worse than 1991. 1991 was the 1 year when our GDP went down in modern memory. So given that, he's basically saying that we could be in a recession. I mean, maybe he's not exactly using that word, but I don't see why we would. I don't know that we're in a recession, but could we be in a recession? Yes. I mean, that's the problem with we're not measuring the informal sector. We don't know just how much it's tanked. And so we have really no way of knowing. It's not that this question has an answer and somebody's hiding it. Nobody really knows. We're just picking up the symptoms from different sides. I'm not saying, I think the IMF has come out and said that, they have come back and decided that, Arvind is not actually right, and they are also competent people. So I'm not taking I don't know the answer. I don't know that we are in a recession. But you asked, could we be in a recession? I mean, there's nothing in the data that says we couldn't be in a recession.
What's the sanctity of this whole GDP thing? I mean, we set so much store by this 5%. Oh, it's not 5, but celebration with 5.3%. Then $5 trillion. It seems like an educated guess. Is it much more than that?
No, it's never is. And I mean, just the informal sector, what we do is every 5 years, we survey the informal sector. We generate a ratio, basically, which we use to scale up formal sector GDP. And agriculture, we treat separately. So that's roughly how we get GDP. So the informal sector is really anybody's guess at any point of time, because if something happened, let's say GST slowed it down, you're going to not see, the ratio wouldn't change. So you would multiply, since you haven't computed the fresh ratio, you're going to use the old ratio. So therefore you'll not pick it up kind of mechanically.
I mean, we can go on about this because it's such a sore point, but I want to take it back to one of the first economic chapters in your book, which pertain to migration. Because there is so much of all the CA and RC talk right now, and you make a very interesting point. You say, first, the thing to accept is that migration is not the epidemic that we think it is. I mean, the scale of it is not so monstrous that we all need to be worried about it.
Yeah.
I mean, can you just tell the audience a little bit about
that? It's interesting because concern in people studying the Indian economy has always been that India is a slow migration economy. It's among the economies where, and there's lots of diagnosis of this. For example, that our urban infrastructure is really inadequate, and therefore it's very hard to find housing and all those things. So there's people actually studying that. But this is also true elsewhere. I'll give you a number that's actually kind of striking. So the Greek economy in the recent Greek crisis, the unemployment rates for the young were 50-60%. Okay? And the entire welfare system was bankrupt, and therefore nobody was getting paid welfare either. So it was really, there was nothing for these people. Over that entire period of the Greek crisis, 60,000 Greeks left Greece. Now, Greece is part of the EU, so they could have gone to Germany, all of them. Easy. The entire population of Greece could have gone to Germany legally. 60,000 left.
Only.
So that's a number that should make us think why, worry about, in a sense, why people don't migrate, rather than why would people just, this image of people waiting at the border to rush in. It's just, there's no data for it. There's people, in a sense, the only big driver of migration is a disaster. So when you have Iraq, Syria, Venezuela, these are supplying migrants to the world. These are not poor countries. These are middle-income countries. Liberia is not a big supplier of migrants to the world, nor is Sierra Leone. It's middle-income countries with civil wars or complete economic disasters like Venezuela that supply the world's migrants. And I think that's telling, which is that it's not pull that gets migrants out. It's not the economic pull that gets a lot of migrants out. It's push.
Now, could it be because there is a psychosis which is being fed by scarcity of jobs, that people get this feeling, however misplaced it is, that I have very few job options at my disposal, and whatever little there is will be taken by this guy who's coming from somewhere else. Now, all of this you have disproved in this book, but could it be stemming from this sense of insecurity?
It could be, but it's just, there isn't really any evidence for it. Sure, I think people have this idea that, how could it not be that? Because, they have this, they've learned economics in high school, and that's one of the dangers of learning economics in high school is you learn it halfway. So you learn that there's a supply curve and a demand curve, and when the supply curve moves, more people come in, the price goes down, wages go down. What people forget is that when people migrate, they don't live on air. They buy stuff. It also moves demand for labor. And in particular, economic migrants tend to be actually usually, very enterprising people who will start businesses, who will stay up all night to be more productive than the others. So they tend to be actually add a lot to the economy. So the net effect of migration is actually been measured in many contexts to be essentially zero. So there's no evidence that migrants depress low-income wages, and so yes, I think people have this idea that these people are coming in and they must be taking my job away. But in fact, what happens when a lot of people come is that you end up in a slightly different job. You become the manager for the people, the newcomers. You start a restaurant to feed them. So people actually reallocate to absorb them.
Now, this sense of that you're talking about, that people actually don't understand the issues involved and they come to judgments about many things. There's an important part of the book where you speak about how a government or a person can be in place and be very popular without delivering anything on the economic or social front. Now, this is eerily familiar with what we may be experiencing today. At least a lot of people believe that how is a particular disposition so popular, given that we are in a mess economically, and a lot of people would say even socially? Can you explain your contention that these are not either necessary or sufficient conditions for a government to be popular or be in place?
Well, I mean, I think you are. I don't think I would quite say that. I don't think we quite say that. I think we say something.
No, not in the political context. That is my putting words into your mouth. But you did make the assertion that you don't need to deliver on the economic or social front to be well thought of or popular or anything like that, or to be elected.
Yeah. So what I think is, I mean, I'll give you a few pieces of that story, which I think are important. One is simply the fact that I think it's very important to understand the sort of how the voter. Let me take the context of the U.S. Okay, in the U.S., when Trump has really sort of at some. He's delivered, but only in a very perverse way, in the sense that he's sort of, railed against China or something. But it's not that he has done anything very specific for the low-income population. He's given tax cuts, especially to real estate companies, which is what he owns. I mean, he's been extraordinarily cynical in the way he has done economic policy, shamelessly so.
But all that you just said, you could have given India's example as well. You could have said Pakistan instead of China and tax cuts instead of real estate cuts. But they are all the same. But
let me just continue the point I was making, because it's in a sense it's a simpler example. Okay. But what I think, why do people vote for Trump? So he hasn't done anything real for them. He's devastating the social fabric in a sense as he goes. What he does do is he manages to make people feel that, look, whatever I do, those guys, they really hate you. I think that's what he's managed to convince a bunch of people, and I think that's a very powerful move. He's managed to convince a bunch of voters that there is this nebulous elite out there who actually are deeply cynical about them, who are sympathetic to people of color and to people of different sexualities, but don't actually appreciate the white working man. And I think he has managed to. So it's not that they vote for Trump because they actually trust him. They vote for Trump because Trump speaks their language. It's very different. Those are two very different things. Trump appeals to their sense of this is particular. He speaks our culture. He serves McDonald's. I mean, the fact that Trump serves McDonald's in the White House, that in a sense is seen by many people as a triumph of his authenticity. And he plays the authenticity, even though he's a wealthy, maybe he's not as wealthy as he claims, almost surely not, but he's someone who has projected himself as being, and he's certainly from the elite, but he plays this game very successfully of being of the people. And so I think there is a very important cultural dimension to that, which is that he projects very successfully this idea that he's of the people in a deep way, in which all the Democrats are not. And Hillary Clinton, I think, really blew it exactly when she mentioned those people. Remember that? I don't know if you ever follow U.S. politics, yes. But she said those people. That was the end of Hillary Clinton, because it completely sealed the idea that she represents a sneering elite. And I think this idea, and therefore, I think, going back to the conversation we were having before, I think the economic failure of U.S. capitalism is key here, which is that people they've been told that economists have said that soon they're all going to be hunky-dory for them, and it hasn't been. And now at this point they think it's all a conspiracy of the elites. They're like whatever, business elites, academic elites, they're all liars. And so Trump at least speaks in their own language, and their logic, he plays their logic, which is that, if we just shut down trade with China, we'll all be better off. So he by adopting the language of the victims, even though he's by no means a victim, he actually gives them a sense that he actually cares for them. And I think that's, so I think I don't think they really believe that he can deliver, but at least he'll hit those obnoxious elites, and that's what, and they hate him, so I love him.
Yeah, so in that you also mentioned that there is a very strong herd feeling.
Yes.
That individually people may not be bigoted, but they suddenly come together when you spin them a fear of the other, which is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Do you see parallels of that in this country as well today?
Yes. I mean, I think that there is. You have to so. I think that here it's a particularly odd. India and the US are similar in one very important way. The minorities are actually minorities. Then they're really not anywhere close to being dominant. So I think the sense that there is a that we need to be mindful of the minorities. This talk about, you hear from at least the fringes of the ruling party about the demographics of the Muslim population. This is really just ways to sort of demonize a population. In fact, it's a poor, like the African Americans and the Mexicans, the US, the minorities. You can take the entire group of minorities. They're a relatively economically deprived and educationally deprived and small group. I mean, with a very powerful and economically much better off majority. So in some ways, it's against, whenever these fears are stoked, they are stoked. You could imagine a context where these are two equal groups, and there's lots of, you worry about the other group becoming too powerful. This is just not realistic here. And in that sense, I feel that, all the reference to it is a bit of a, I mean, is constructing a narrative that has no basis in reality. I don't think there is any real fear that, there's going to be a Muslim takeover of India.
When you think about America and when you think about India, these are the two countries you are principally anchored in. Do you feel at a time like this that, given your position now, you should become even more politically vocal?
No, I don't think so. I think to a first approximation, I believe that what is most useful, if anything that I do is useful, is the work that our organization, Poverty Action Lab, does. And I think we are mostly committed to working with anybody who wants to do something useful. And I think becoming political is not helpful in that context, because whatever people react to, people react to things that are not meant to be even offensive. If you're just honest, some people react to it, and I don't want my view is that we are better off mostly putting our head down and doing what we do best, which is try to help the poorest people, and that never, I think, is still a very real option. It's not that, despite all the bad politics in both of these countries that you may worry about, I think state governments, including from the BJP, work with us, and we've often found them very responsive to sensible things. I mean, one of the pieces of work that we did with Mr. Modi in Gujarat now is policy in Gujarat. So I think it's changed, and this was on how to reduce industrial pollutants. So I do think that the work we do is useful. To become stridently partisan is not helpful.
No. I didn't mean political,
not
join a party.
No, not helpful. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to join a party. I want to be, in a sense, where I can be the most useful. And that's, in that sense, I feel that, our current political positioning is one that I think is well crafted, in the sense I would like it to stay there. I would like to be, so that nobody thinks we are the enemy. I think because we're not. We would like to work with whoever is doing something useful for society, and without prejudice, in a sense. And I mean that seriously.
Okay. Before I toss it over to the audience, they'll have questions for you. I want to ask you just one or two questions about. There's a budget coming up next week, you know that. And you've written extensively in your book about how the rich should be taxed, whether issues like wealth tax belong in our society. What would you expect at a situation like this, where the government is finding it difficult to finance the kind of outreach it wants to do or spread out the money? Do you think there should be stronger progressive taxation in India? Do we need a wealth tax?
Yes. I mean, given just the amount of inequality that we now have, I think a wealth tax is completely sensible. And in general, I think more redistribution makes perfect sense to me. Do I expect it to happen right now? I suspect not. I just think that I think all the vibes I hear are about tax cuts for the middle classes.
Misplaced, you think?
I really think that that's not where the leverage points are. I think, to be honest, I'm less worried about the budget deficit. The budget deficit has never been what it's claimed to be. So I think the government can do better by sort of right now thinking of this as being, kind of think of the US in 2009-10, kind of they parked this whole budget deficit, monetary discipline and all that somewhere and went for it. And that was great for the economy. I think that's what's still fueling US growth, actually.
Yeah, the budget deficit is a lie, like the GDP, right?
The budget deficit is a much more known lie. The
That's
GDP is a, I mean, in the sense that I think the GDP, we really don't know what it is. The budget deficit, we kind of know that there is a bunch of off-balance sheet items.
Right.
You know very well how to recompute it, and you'll get a much bigger number.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, across to you now. I'll have the last question still, but now it's your turn to ask questions. 4 questions.
4 questions is a lot. I don't know if I can remember 4. Let's do one at a time, because I can't remember 4.
No. As in 4 people who can ask
4 questions. I
4
see.
questions. Like
We'll
that.
take 4 questions and we'll keep it to 4 because there will be a book signing afterwards.
Book signing. Yeah. Over here, please.
I
Do we have someone?
I can't see anybody, so
Who decides who asks?
the lights are in my eye.
Yeah.
Forgive me.
I have a question. You just said that poverty has halved over the years, in the last few years.
Can you speak a little louder?
You said that the poverty
Yeah.
worldwide has halved.
Yeah.
But the problem, don't you think there's a problem because $90 as the index has been kept static while the costs have gone up?
No, I think the computation is done correctly, which is that it's $90 in 2011 PPP, I believe, but that is corrected. The prices are corrected. I don't think there's a problem there. I don't think it's not a conceptual error. The World Bank is good at these things.
Next.
Hello, Mr. Banerjee. Good evening. Yeah,
I,
over here.
I kind of see you.
Go on, ask your
Okay,
question.
yeah. Recently, Mr. C. Rangarajan, the ex-RBI governor, he recently said that we need to maintain 9% GDP growth in order to become a $5 trillion economy, which seems to be a bit of an oxymoron to me because we are
Can
on
you
the...
speak louder?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, is it audible? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. C. Rangarajan recently said that we need to maintain to become a $5 trillion economy, we'll have to maintain 9% GDP growth, which seems to be a bit of an oxymoron to me because we are on the verge of selling our prestigious PSUs. So, how do you think that is going to make a sense?
I would love to sell our prestigious PSUs. I'm sorry. I just took an Air India flight.
Hey, at the back, please, at the back.
Good evening, sir.
Go on.
Yes, sir.
Please ask your question.
Yes, sir. I just want to ask you what you want to become in your next life.
Next life, man, literally in my Hindu, after I die, I'm not planning to hang up my economic boots, so I'm not very good at anything else. So I better do what I'm doing. I seem to be doing all right now, so I'm going to stick to it.
Hello, I am here, Sandeep Banerjee. My question is to you that in the budget, government have financed many more for the industries, but not for the labor and the poverties. Do you think that it will be better if government increase the money in the budget for the labor sector and for development of the poorer?
To be honest, if you, the one thing that you would, that I think is not entirely true. I mean, this government has actually been roughly, in terms of the way it deals with welfare, it has been about as welfarist as the previous governments. It's not that we don't see a big shift there. It tends to be, it sort of advertised itself originally as a kind of a small government, free market government, but it hasn't actually done that. There's lots of new schemes, in fact, very expensive new schemes. If at some point Ayushman Bharat gets properly implemented, it will be an enormously expensive scheme as well. So I don't think of it as being, I think if anything, the government has been most committed to a bunch of welfare undertakings. It has cut back in some of the areas, but in general, the government is the budget is not in good shape. So it's not surprising, but it's not been particularly that it's been cheap on welfare schemes. There's a whole bunch of new ones. The Swachh Bharat, the Ujjwala, the Ayushman Bharat, all of they're a bunch of big schemes. So it's not obvious to me that they aren't doing anything for the poor. The question is more, at this point, if I had to pick a priority for the government, I would have picked funding monies to kind of refinance the banking sector, which is kind of in deep doldrums, and it will take a long time to revive if there's no money put in from outside. And second, to improve the infrastructure, which I think is, those two things are, I think, priorities. I think giveaways to the corporate sector, other than, I think, unfortunately, the banking sector, I wish they didn't do. But I think the banking sector, alas, will need some giveaways.
Abhijit, let me end with your dedication. It's a very beautiful dedication to your children, saying that in the hope that they grow up to a more just and humane world. Are you hopeful, or is it a sense of grim foreboding?
I'm hopeful. I still think we've achieved a lot. We are in a moment where we are hesitating, but hopefully we'll hold on to hope.
On that note, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and thank Abhijit Banerjee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No more mics.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. Thank you, Udayan. I request you to sit there because, we'd like the signing to happen here itself. That's the only way we can get a sense of some order there. And before all of that, a true gratitude to you, because I know this has been a very busy couple of days for you, and you still made time, and a couple of weeks, all right, and to come here and to take so many questions and to enjoy this very large audience. I'd also like to thank Victoria Memorial Hall for the wonderful arrangements, and a special round of applause for CISF for doing their very best to accommodate all those they could. And last but not the least, my Sutradhar, Udayan Mukherjee, I got him to do this. I thought he was coming from the hills, but he was coming from Bombay, and it wasn't so hard. And I'm so glad that we have someone who knows the guests, because it always adds to the conversation. Now, my request is we do this with some sense and order. So if you all can line up here, you can get your book signed and exit from that side.
Please open the book to the page you want.
সবাই হবে, টেনশন নেই।
आप पेज खोल के रखें।